The founder's son rolled his eyes as I walked into the boardroom in my old suit, holding three navy blue folders. He sneered. "You have never been good with contracts." The company lawyer, Marcus, smiled until I opened the first folder. "Your signatures are invalid," I said calmly. "I drafted the original $1.2 billion license." The room fell dead silent. I am Lauren Vance, and that moment was the entire truth of my 16 years at Streamline. They say the devil is in the details, but that is a lie people tell themselves because they are too lazy to read the fine print. The devil is not in the details. The devil is in the definition section, usually around page 4, paragraph 3, subsection B. That is where I lived. For 16 years, while the sales teams were out buying steak dinners and the marketing department was busy smelling their own cologne, in brainstorming sessions about synergy, I was in the windowless back room building the engine. My job title was Corporate Licensing Architect. It sounds boring. I know it sounds like the kind of job where you wear beige cardigans and die quietly at your desk. But in the world of data streaming, I was the person who ensured the multi-billion-dollar pipes did not burst. I drafted the code, not computer code, but the legal code, the very DNA of the company. 16 years ago, Streamline was not the tech giant in the shimmering glass tower in Wilmington, Delaware. It was three ambitious guys and me crammed into a rented office above a tire shop that smelled perpetually of burnt rubber and pure, unadulterated desperation. I remember sitting on a folding chair, balancing a laptop on my knees, drafting the original exclusivity agreements while the founder, Old Man Harris, paced around smoking cheap cigars. He was a difficult man, but he was a smart man. He knew that the actual technology did not matter if the legal rights were not locked down and airtight. "Lauren," he would say, pointing a rough finger at the screen, "make it bulletproof. I want a contract so tight that if they try to breathe without paying us, they owe us for the oxygen." So I did exactly that. I built a fortress of paper. I wove clauses together like a spider web made of razor wire. I created the entire licensing infrastructure that eventually turned that little tire shop startup into a thriving $1.2 billion empire. For 16 years, I stayed in the shadows. I did not want the fame. I did not need the magazine covers. I just wanted the machine to work perfectly. But the problem with building a perfect, quiet machine is that eventually people forget it needs a mechanic. They just assume it runs on magic or on its own. Old Man Harris died last year. A sudden heart attack. Probably the first time his heart had done anything spontaneous in his 80 years. And just like that, the kingdom was passed to his prince. Enter Brent. Brent Harris, 32 years old, an MBA from a school his daddy had paid a library wing for. His teeth were whitened to a shade that does not exist in nature. He walked into the CEO's office on day one, wearing a suit that cost more than my first Honda, carrying a latte and a sense of aggressive entitlement so dense it seemed to have its own separate gravitational pull. I knew we were in serious trouble the moment he called his very first all-hands meeting. He did not talk about stability. He did not talk about our reliable core licensing revenue. He talked only about disruption. He used the word pivot 6 times in 3 minutes. He looked at the company his father had built, the company I had secured, and saw it only as an automated teller machine for his own massive ego. He looked at me, the woman in the corner with the sensible glasses and the 3 ring binders, and he did not see the architect. He saw furniture. He saw a legacy cost. He saw a boomer relic. I am 45 years old, you illiterate turnip. That is Generation X, but whatever. About 3 months into his reign, I had a meeting with him. I was trying to explain the volatility of our Asia Pacific sublicensing agreements. It is a delicate, intertwined ecosystem. You pull one single thread and the whole expensive sweater unravels. Lauren, Brent interrupted, spinning a literal fidget spinner on the mahogany table in the middle of the room. You are getting bogged down in the how. I need you to focus only on the wow. We need to be agile. You need to break things to make progress. I lowered my reading glasses slowly. Brent, if we break the sublicensing terms in Singapore, we trigger an automatic default clause in the German master agreement. We lose the entire European market overnight. He rolled his eyes. He actually rolled them like a teenager asked to take out the trash. That is just legal mumbo jumbo, Lauren. We have expensive lawyers for that. I need visionaries, not boring librarians. The entire room went quiet. The other executives, men and women I had worked with for a decade, men and women whose careers I had saved from over a dozen potential lawsuits, stared intently at their notebooks. No one said a single word. No one defended the woman who built the entire floor they were standing on. That was the moment. That was the shotgun blast. I did not say anything back. I just closed my binder. The sound of the metal rings snapping shut echoed like a gunshot in that awful, silent room. Understood, I said. My voice was calm, as it always is. My rage does not scream, it calculates. I will stop being a librarian. Brent smirked, thinking he had won a small power struggle. He thought he was housebreaking the quiet, old staff. He had absolutely no idea he had just walked into the reactor core and casually turned off the cooling system. The moment I snapped that binder shut and walked out of the war room, I stopped being an employee, and I became the last person who truly knew where the real bodies were buried. Brent Harris had confused authority with power. He had the title, he had the corner office, and he had the signatory pen, but he did not know where the keys to the castle were. More importantly, he did not know that the key to my freedom was hidden inside my own employment file and that he had just handed me the instruction manual. I went back to my office, a small, windowless box compared to the sleek glass fishbowls the new vice presidents got, and I started to organize. I did not organize for efficiency, though I organized for war. I pulled up the original founding documents, the ones with the coffee stains, the ones typed on software that probably does not exist anymore. I was surrounded by the dull, comforting hum of the servers I had authorized the budget for 10 years ago. I waited because men like Brent are deeply, deeply predictable. They are like bad code. They always crash the same way. I knew he needed to cut costs to fund his visionary new projects, which mostly involved some blockchain buzzword because of course they did. And the easiest cost to cut is the quiet department that never makes a fuss. I could feel the axe swinging before Kayla, the human resources director, even called. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Tuesday is the coward's day for firing people. Monday is too aggressive. Friday risks a weekend public relations disaster. Tuesday is bland. Tuesday is safe. Lauren, could you just pop down to the strategy room? Kayla's voice had that telltale tremble. That therapy, speak tremble that meant, I am about to ruin your life, but I am going to use soft, gentle corporate language while I do it. On my way, I said. I picked up my coffee mug. It was cold. I left it there. I grabbed nothing else. No notebook, no pen, just me in my suit. I walked into the glass strategy room, the blinds drawn, so much for transparency. Brent did not even turn around when I walked in. He was leaning against the window, checking his Rolex, looking bored. Kayla, the human resources director, was clutching a thick manila folder like a paper shield. "Have a seat, Lauren," Kayla said. She did not offer me water. That is the first sign. If they offer water, they feel guilty. If they do not, they just want you gone. "Am I being fired, Kayla?" I asked, skipping the dance entirely. She blinked. "We are going through a strategic realignment, Lauren. Brent and the board have been reviewing our operational efficiency." "Restructuring?" I said flatly. "Just say the word. It has fewer syllables." Brent finally turned around, giving me that smirk, the one that says he thinks he is the smartest person in the room because his father owned the building. "Look, Lauren, let us not make this a drama. The industry is shifting. We need cloud native thinkers. You have done adequate work here for the era, but we are pivoting to a lean, agile model. We need speed, and frankly, your department is a bottleneck." "A bottleneck?" I repeated. "You mean compliance." "I mean dead weight," Brent said, dropping the corporate speak for a second. "We are automating the licensing framework. Artificial intelligence can do what you do in seconds." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop a cackle from escaping. Artificial intelligence doing my job. Good luck getting a generic pre-trained transformer to understand the nuance of a cross-border indemnity clause regarding third-party intellectual property in a non-extradition treaty zone. "So I am redundant," I said. "Your role has been eliminated," Kayla corrected quickly, sliding a thick severance packet across the table. It was an insult. 6 months of pay for 16 years of building the entire foundation of the company. "And my equity?" I asked. "My vesting schedule." Brent waved a hand dismissively. "Standard terms apply. Anything unvested is forfeited. You know the drill, Lauren. You wrote half the policy, did not you?" He thought that was a burn. "I did," I said, standing up. "I wrote the policy for employees. I did not write the policy for founders' partners." I paused. "I will sign the separation agreement, but I need one thing first." "We cannot give you access to your computer," Kayla said, panicking. "I do not need the computer. I need a hard copy of my original employment contract, the one signed by your father in 2008, and a printout of my current personnel record showing my termination date and cause." "Why?" Brent asked, his eyes narrowing. "For my unemployment filing." I lied smoothly. "The state requires proof of the original hire date for long-term benefits calculations." It was complete, bureaucratic gibberish, but people like Brent and Kayla are terrified of bureaucracy, so they obey it. Kayla scurried out and returned breathless, handing me the thin stack of papers, my 2008 contract and the termination notice, signed by Brent, dated today. "Reason for separation. Redundancy role elimination." "Thank you," I said, placing the papers into my briefcase. "I will take the separation agreement home to review. Standard procedure. You gave me 48 hours in the document itself. Clause 12. I wrote it, remember." Brent shrugged. "Whatever. Let her take it. She has got no leverage. What is she going to do, sue us for being boring?" I walked out. I did not pack a box. I rode the elevator down and walked out into the Delaware sunshine. My heart was pounding not from fear, but from adrenaline, because as I clutched that folder to my chest, I drove home and went straight to my dining room table. This was my war room. I placed the documents on the table and went to the wall safe behind a generic abstract painting. Inside were not jewels or cash, but a heavy fireproof document box. This was the in case of emergency kit, or as I liked to call it, the dead man's switch. I opened the box, pulled out the original master license agreement, the MLA from 2008. I looked at the termination letter Brent had signed, role eliminated due to redundancy. Redundancy, I whispered, tracing the word with my finger. You idiot. Now for the trap doors. I pulled up my original employment contract. Clause 9, Intellectual Property Retention. In the event of involuntary termination without cause, the employee, Lauren, retains a 1.5% royalty interest in all licensing structures she personally authored, retroactive to the date of deployment, vesting immediately upon termination. I had written it as a joke back when the company had no money. 1.5% of $1.2 billion. That is not nothing. That is buy a private island and name it Brent is a moron. But that was the price. Now for the leverage. I pulled the 2018 Global Expansion Amendment, the one that accounted for 70% of our current revenue. Then I compared its digital signature with the requirements of the 2008 Master Agreement. And there it was, the ghost in the machine. In 2008, Old Man Harris was paranoid about a board coup, so I wrote Clause 14b, the Sovereignty Clause. It stated that any amendment altering the core intellectual property exclusivity must be countersigned in wet ink by the founding licensor, Harris, and the chief licensing architect, me. When the 2018 expansion happened, everyone was in a rush. The lawyers said digital was fine. I let it slide. But the 2008 Master Agreement stated that any amendment violating the signature protocol is void ab initio, meaning it does not just stop working today. It means it never legally existed. If the 2018 amendment is void, Streamline does not have the right to license its tech to anyone outside of the United States, which meant every single dollar they had collected from international partners for the last 6 years, hundreds of millions of dollars, was collected illegally. It was, at best, a breach of contract on a planetary scale. Brent did not just fire an employee. He fired the only person whose silence was validating a billion-dollar legal error. By firing me without cause, he severed the implied covenant of good faith that kept me from pointing this out. I started to sort the papers into my 3 folders. Folder 1, the truth. Folder 2, the crime. Folder 3, the price. I was not going to sue them yet. I was going to let Brent climb all the way to the top, scream his victory to the world, and then I was going to pull the pin. I needed him to commit one more act. I needed him to publicly rely on the invalid contract one more time with his name on it. For the next 2 weeks, I lived in a strange, hyper-aware exile. My house in the suburbs was quiet, a specialized kind of quiet, insulated triple-paned. I liked it that way. No kids, no husband anymore. My ex-husband Todd had left 6 years ago for a spin instructor named Candy with a K, and frankly, I should have sent her a thank you note. It had forced me to rely only on myself, to build my own fortress, which was exactly what I was doing now. I woke up every morning at 6 o'clock sharp, did my yoga because flexibility is critical when you are about to bend a corporation over a barrel. Then, I sat at my dining table, which I now called the command center, and I monitored the wires. I had set up Google Alerts for Streamline, for Brent Harris, And most critically, for Eurotech Solutions, Eurotech was the big fish. They were a massive German conglomerate looking to license our entire streaming backend for the European market. It was the deal Brent had been chasing for 6 months, the one he needed to prove to the shareholders that he was not just a nepotism hire. It was a $200 million contract, and it was entirely, spectacularly illegal. I was patient. I was waiting for the final, public act of reliance. I needed Brent to commit the company publicly to the illegal contract one last time, putting his name on the line. I knew he would not be able to resist. Men like Brent cannot resist a microphone. On a Thursday morning, it happened. I saw it on TechCrunch first, a small article with a very loud headline. Streamline partners with Eurotech in historic $200 million licensing deal. CEO Brent Harris calls it the dawn of a borderless data future. I pulled up the article. There was a photo of Brent beaming, shaking hands with the Eurotech chief executive in Berlin. Brent looked like he had just personally invented the internet. The article was full of quotes about synergy and robust legal frameworks. I zoomed in on the photo. In the background, on a large screen, was a schematic of the data architecture. My architecture, the one governed by the 2008 Master License Agreement. Got you. I whispered to the screen. The satisfaction was so pure it felt cold, like breathing winter air. I did not call Brent. Calling Brent would give him a chance to spin it, to try and bury the problem, maybe try to bribe me with an expensive consulting fee. No. I needed to cut off his air supply completely, and the only person who could do that was the German. I opened my laptop and composed an email. I did not send it to Streamline. I sent it directly to the General Counsel of Eurotech Solutions, a man named Klaus. I had met him once, years ago, at a conference in Geneva. He was a serious, deeply thorough man who wore three-piece suits and had absolutely zero sense of humor. He was a man who respected rules. The subject line was surgical. Inquiry regarding Clause 14b Streamline Licensing Authority. The body was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Dear Klaus, I hope this note finds you well. I am writing to you as the original author of the Streamline Master License Agreement from 2008. I noticed the exciting news about your partnership, as I am no longer with Streamline, effective 2 weeks ago. I am organizing my personal records. I wanted to bring a small administrative detail to your attention to ensure your compliance team is fully covered. I paused, savoring the moment. Do you please verify if the 2018 Global Amendment attached to your license agreement contains the wet ink countersignatures required under Clause 14b of the founding document? My records indicate that without these specific signatures, the amendment is technically void ab initio, which would unfortunately render any sublicensing of the intellectual property to Eurotech unauthorized under United States law. I am sure it is just a paperwork oversight on Streamline's end. Given the strict liability laws in the European Union regarding intellectual property theft, I thought a friend should let you know. Best regards, Lauren. It framed the massive, multi-million-dollar fraud as a simple paperwork oversight. It was beautiful. It was not a threat. It was a friendly heads up to a colleague about an administrative detail. I hit send. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon in Delaware, which meant it was 8 o'clock in the evening in Germany. Klaus was likely at a late dinner, possibly with a thick binder nearby. He would check his phone. He would see the name, Lauren Vance, the woman he once met who spoke only in legal paragraphs. He would frown. He would read the email. He would call his junior associates. They would pull the contract. They would look at clause 14b. They would look at the digital signatures. Then the screaming would start. I poured a fresh, black cup of coffee and watched the clock. My heart was not pounding, it was ticking, counting down the seconds until the inevitable implosion. My emotional state had settled into a kind of grim, calm anticipation, like a hunter who has perfectly set a trap and now only needs to hear the click. I had given up on the hope of recognition from Brent. What I needed now was justice, delivered not by a judge, but by the cold, unforgiving mechanics of the law I had built. I had waited 16 years to truly prove my value. 2 weeks was nothing. I knew my time was almost up because when the phone rang, I knew the wire transfer was already frozen and the ice was spreading. The first call came at 5:15 post-meridian. It was a number I instantly recognized, the direct line to the Streamline General Counsel's office. I did not answer. I watched it go to voicemail, picturing Marcus Chen, the General Counsel, sweating profusely in his expensive suit, wondering how the quiet librarian had suddenly materialized 1,000 miles away to ruin his Thursday evening. Marcus was a decent man, but weak. He would do whatever Brent told him, right up until the point the Federal Bureau of Investigation got involved. 2 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Brent's cell number. I let it go to voicemail too. 5 minutes later, a text arrived from Brent. The text was not a question, it was an explosion. Lauren, pick up the phone. What the F did you send to Germany? We need to talk now. I took a screenshot of the text. I added it to folder 2, the one labeled the crime. This was documentation. This was evidence of their panic, their implicit understanding of the disaster I had just triggered. Then I replied. I typed slowly, savoring every letter. I am sorry. Who is this? I do not have this number saved. My employment ended 2 weeks ago. The dots bubbled instantly. He was typing furiously. The rage radiating from his text message was almost a physical sensation. Stop playing games. Klaus just put a hold on the wire transfer. He is talking about fraudulent inducement. You need to fix this. Call them back and tell them you were mistaken. I smiled. I could hear his panic across the long-term evolution network. The $200 million wire transfer was frozen. The stock price was going to take a vicious hit the moment the rumors started flying around the market. The image of his perfectly whitened teeth grinding together was immensely satisfying. I typed back slowly, maintaining my shield of bureaucratic distance. I cannot speak on behalf of the company, Brent. I am not an employee. I am just a confused bystander. If you need my professional opinion on the contracts, I am available for consultation. My rate is considerably higher than my salary was. He did not text back immediately. He was probably throwing his phone across the room. I took a calm sip of my cold coffee. 10 minutes later, an email arrived. Official company letterhead from Marcus Chen, the General Counsel. Subject: Urgent legal consultation and settlement discussion. Dear Lauren, we would like to invite you to the office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock in the morning to discuss the recent communications regarding the Eurotech deal. We believe there has been a misunderstanding regarding the validity of the 2018 amendment. We are prepared to discuss a retroactive consulting arrangement to clarify these terms. Please confirm your attendance. Marcus, clarify these terms. That was lawyer, speak for, please. For the love of God, come save our asses before we all go to prison. I did not reply immediately. I needed to enjoy the moment. This email was the formal, written proof that Brent Harris, the visionary, the disruptor, had completely failed, and the only path forward required the help of the quiet librarian he had dismissed. This moment was the validation I had been craving for 16 years. I thought about the core conflict, the internal battle I always fought, the fear of being seen versus the desperate need to be valued. Now, they were begging to see me. They were forced to value me. I went to my closet. I pushed aside the yoga gear and the sensible sweaters. I reached into the very back and pulled out the suit. It was a vintage Armani, charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass. It was my armor. I had not worn wouldn't make it. I had not worn it in 5 years because it felt too aggressive for the casual office culture Brent tried to instill. Tomorrow, I said to the suit hanging in the dark closet, we are going to be aggressive. I replied to Marcus's urgent email with one single word. Confirmed. The trap was sprung. Now I just had to walk in and calmly, elegantly close the jaws. I spent the evening preparing. I did not need to study the documents because I had written them. I studied the players. Brent arrogant, panicked, willing to spend any amount of money to avoid public failure. Marcus, terrified of Brent, terrified of legal exposure, desperate for a clean exit. The external lawyers they would bring mercenary, focused only on neutralizing the threat as quickly as possible. I knew exactly what each person in that room wanted, and I knew exactly what I was going to give them and what I was going to take in return. That night, I slept like a baby. The kind of deep, restorative sleep you only get when you know you hold the winning lottery ticket and everyone else is holding a losing betting slip. While I slept, I knew what was happening inside Streamline headquarters. I still had contacts there, low-level analysts and paralegals, the invisible people Brent ignored, just like me. My phone buzzed silently through the night with encrypted messages. Dude, why is the General Counsel screaming at the Information Technology Director at 10 Post Meridian? They are scrubbing the servers, searching for wet ink documents. Brent is in the boardroom. He looks like he is going to throw up. Did you do something? I did not reply. Plausible deniability is a beautiful thing. I showered. I styled my hair. A tight bun, severe, no loose strands. I put on the Armani suit. It fit perfectly. It felt like chain mail. I applied my makeup. Not too much, just enough to look alive, awake, and exceptionally dangerous. I drank my coffee black. I gathered my 3 folders from the kitchen counter. They were innocent, looking navy blue card stock. Folder 1, the law. Folder 2, the evidence. Folder 3, the bill. I put them in my leather briefcase, the one old man Harris had given me for my 10th anniversary. It was battered, scratched leather. It looked like it had seen battles. It had. I drove to the office. The commute was surreal. I listened to national public radio. They were talking about the weather sunny with a high of 75 degrees. They did not mention that a local tech giant was silently imploding. Not yet. I pulled into the parking lot. My badge had been deactivated, of course. I could not get into the secure executive garage. I had to park in the visitor lot, a half-mile away. Petty, I muttered, locking my sensible Volvo. I walked across the asphalt. The sun was hitting the glass facade of the building. It looked impressive. From the outside, it looked like a fortress of innovation. From the inside, I knew it was a house of cards held together by a signature that did not exist. I walked into the lobby. The trap was fully sprung, and I was about to walk into the jaws and lock them shut from the inside. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Sarah, looked up. Her eyes went wide with alarm, the rumor mill having moved faster than even fiber optics. She knew I had been fired, and she knew I was not supposed to be here. Lauren, she stammered, her voice shaking slightly. I thought. I have a meeting with Marcus and Brent, I said, smiling warmly. It was not her fault. Can you buzz me in? I have to call up, she whispered, reaching nervously for the phone. She whispered into the receiver for a moment, then nodded once, turning pale. They said to send you straight up to the war room? The war room? I raised an eyebrow. They used to call it the Synergy Suite. The fact that they had reverted to calling it the war room meant the panic was terminal, likely fueled by a dozen phone calls from Germany. Thanks, Sarah. I walked to the elevators and pressed the button for the 12th floor. I stepped in and checked my reflection in the mirrored walls. The Armani suit looked formidable. I looked calm. I looked like a woman who was about to audit God. The elevator dinged. The doors opened. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. Usually, this floor was buzzing with assistants and junior vice presidents trying to look busy. Today, it was a ghost town. They had cleared the floor. They did not want witnesses to the inevitable bloodletting. I walked down the long corridor, my heels clicking on the polished concrete. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down. I reached the double glass doors of the boardroom. Through the glass, I could see them clearly. Brent was pacing, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened, his face glistening with sweat. Marcus Chen, the general counsel, was sitting at the table, his head in his hands, surrounded by stacks of paper. Two external lawyers, hired guns, charging easily $1,000 an hour, were whispering to each other, urgently staring at their laptops. They looked up as I approached, their mercenary eyes sizing me up. I did not knock. I just pushed the heavy glass door open and stepped inside. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said. My voice did not shake. It simply filled the room, sounding oddly relaxed in the charged atmosphere. Brent stopped pacing instantly. He turned to me, his eyes red-rimmed. "You," he spat out. "You have some nerve showing up here after trying to sabotage a $200 million deal." "I was invited," I said, walking to the head of the table opposite Marcus, ignoring Brent completely. I placed my leather briefcase gently on the mahogany table. I did not sabotage anything. I simply answered a question from a colleague in Germany. "Transparency is one of your core values, is not it, Brent?" "Transparency? Transparency?" Brent yelled. "You maliciously missiled our partner." "Did I?" I looked at Marcus. "Marcus?" "Tell him." Marcus looked up. He looked aged, like he had not slept in a week. "She is right, Brent." Technically. Technically. Brent slammed his hand down on the table, the sound echoing sharply. "I do not care about technically. I care about the money frozen in the bank." "Sit down, Brent," I said. I did not shout. I used the low, steady voice I used years ago when he was an intern and I had to patiently explain how to refill the industrial printer. It worked. He was so shocked by the quiet command that he actually sat. "Now," I said, unlatching my briefcase. "You asked me here to clarify terms. Let us clarify." I pulled out the 3 navy blue folders. I laid them out in a neat, ominous row. "You have a problem," I said. "A very big, very expensive problem. And contrary to what you think, I am the only person in the world who can fix it. But fixing it is going to cost you." One of the external lawyers, a sharp-looking guy with a shaved head, spoke up. Miss Vance, we are prepared to offer you a consulting agreement to rectify the signature discrepancy. We can offer you a standard rate of. I held up one hand, silencing him instantly. Stop. You think this is a negotiation for an hourly rate. It is not. I placed my hand firmly on folder 1. This is not a consulting gig, I said softly. This is a hostage negotiation, and I am the one holding the gun. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed faintly. Brent stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He finally realized that the librarian had teeth. Hostage negotiation. Brent laughed, a nervous sound. You are delusional. We have 50 lawyers on retainer. You have what? A briefcase from 1995 and a grudge. I have the truth, Brent. I said, sliding folder 1 toward Marcus. Open it. Marcus hesitated. He looked at the external lawyers, who gave a slight, resigned nod. Go ahead. See what she has. Marcus opened the navy blue folder. Inside was a single, parchment, colored page, a certified copy of the 2008 Master License Agreement, specifically page 40. 2. Clause 14b. Read the highlighted section, Marcus. Out loud for the class, Marcus adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began reading. Clause 14b. Sovereignty of intellectual property. Any amendment, addendum, or modification that alters the territorial exclusivity of the licensed technology must be countersigned in wet ink by the founding licensor, Harris, and the chief licensing architect, Vance. Failure to adhere to this protocol renders said amendment void ab initio. I leaned forward slightly, letting the words sink in. Void ab initio, I said. Do you know what that means, Brent? It means it is void from the beginning, Marcus whispered, his face going pale gray. Exactly, I said. It means the 2018 Global Expansion Amendment, the one you have used to sign deals in Japan, Brazil, the United Kingdom, and now Germany, never legally existed. You have been selling rights you do not own for 6 years. As, der the fonadar so ralaudi as I moi elkedi into the board our eine memwe old suate. Ild any ferop adars te epp elm emwe tr amna an, ema the never bigo do ith cointira cts. Ishisen irid, the compa in al idowir samodid. UNTIL I open and TH first fel DRYOR sigimenturus R INVLD ICE aid calamly. I dear efted THEO IDEL OMPNT TWO bella ON dualit LRLS TE rao MFLDEAD CLTS. The phrase echoed in the sudden quiet, confirming the power shift I had orchestrated. This was the moment that validated every quiet, unappreciated hour I had spent alone. The room fell dead silent when Marcus whispered, It means it is void from the beginning. Brent, his face pale, tried desperately to find a loophole. That is a technicality, Brent shouted, standing up again, clutching the edge of the mahogany table. It is a clerical error. We can just sign it now. Backdate it? No, you cannot, I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. Because Old Man Harris is dead, he cannot sign it. And I am not an employee anymore, so I cannot sign it as the chief licensing architect. You have triggered the clause that locks the key inside the vault. We will argue intent in court. The external lawyer with the shaved head, Sterling, interjected smoothly, trying to salvage the situation. The intent of the parties was clear. The company operated as if the amendment was valid. A judge will uphold the doctrine of equitable estoppel. Maybe. I conceded, leaning back slightly, giving the word weight. In 3 years. After discovery, after the depositions, After every single one of your international partners freezes their payments because they do not want to be accessory to intellectual property fraud, can the stock price survive a 3-year freeze on international revenue? Brent looked like he had been punched squarely in the gut. He knew the answer. The company burned cash at an astronomical rate. Without the international revenue stream, they were insolvent in 6 months. Maybe less. The vision he had for his disruption was collapsing under the weight of his father's old, boring paperwork. "What do you want?" Brent asked. His voice was quiet now. The entitled bluster was gone, replaced by the shaky realism of a man staring down absolute ruin. "You want your job back, is that it? Fine, you are rehired. Come back. Sign the damn paper. We will pretend this never happened." I laughed. It was a genuine, satisfying, victorious laugh. "My job. You think I want to come back to this cubicle farm and report to you?" "No, Brent. I do not want a job." I slid folder 2, the crime, across the table toward Marcus. "This is a timeline," I said. "It documents every single violation of Clause 14B since 2018. Every contract signed, every dollar collected. It totals approximately $840 million in revenue collected under a void contract." Marcus flipped through the pages. His hands were shaking visibly. I had been thorough. I had transaction identification numbers, dates, and counterparties. It was meticulous, devastating evidence. "If I send this folder to the Securities and Exchange Commission," I said, ensuring my tone was level, professional, not threatening, "it is no longer just a contract dispute, it is securities fraud. You reported revenue to shareholders that was based on an invalid legal instrument. You attested to the validity of these contracts in your annual financial filings, Brent. That is federal jail time." Brent sank into his chair. He looked desperately at his hired lawyers. "Is she right?" Sterling sighed, leaning back from his laptop. "It is problematic. If she goes whistleblower, the investigation alone destroys the market cap. Even if we ultimately win the contract dispute, we lose everything in the meantime." "So," I said, clasping my hands on the table, "we have established that I have the power to turn this glass tower into a smoking crater. Now, let us talk about how we avoid that." I reached for folder 3. "This is the solution," I said. "How much?" Brent asked, skipping the pretense entirely. "Just say the number." 1 million? 2? "Oh, Brent?" I smiled. "You are thinking too small. You are thinking like a manager. I need you to think like an owner. Because that is what I am." I opened folder 3 and turned the document around so they could all read it. It was my original 2008 employment agreement. "Clause 9, I said. "Read it." Marcus leaned in, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. He read silently for a long moment, then his eyes bulged out slightly. He looked at me, then at Brent, then back at the paper. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered under his breath. "What?" Brent snapped, desperate. "What does it say?" "It says," Marcus stammered, "that in the event of involuntary termination without cause, Lauren retains a royalty interest in all licensing structures she personally authored, retroactive to the date of deployment." "So what?" Brent waved a dismissive hand. "A royalty. What is it?" "A few $1,000s. It is defined as 1.5% of gross international licensing revenue." Marcus said, his voice trembling now. 1.5%? Brent scoffed, already calculating. "That is peanuts." "Fine. We will pay you 1.5% of this month's sales." No, Brent. I corrected him gently. Retroactive to the date of deployment. That means 2018. You owe me 1.5% of every dollar this company has made outside of the United States for the last 6 years, and 1.5% of every dollar it makes in the future. The room went completely silent once more. The lawyers began doing frantic mental math. $840 million in past revenue. 1.5% of $840 million came out to $12.6 million immediately in cash, plus the staggering future royalty value. That is extortion. Brent whispered, the hatred in his eyes finally pure and unconcealed. No, I said. That is a contract your father signed. A contract you triggered when you fired me without cause to save a few dollars on my salary. We will fight it! Brent yelled. We will argue you were fired for cause, incompetence, insubordination. You cannot. I pointed to the termination letter in folder 2, the one Kayla had handed me. You already signed this. Reason for separation, redundancy, role elimination. You put it in writing, Brent. You cannot change the reason now just because the bill is higher than you expected. Sterling closed his laptop. He looked directly at Brent, delivering the final verdict. She has you cold on the termination cause. If we try to change it now, it looks like retaliation. The Department of Labor would eat us alive before we even got to the contract dispute. $12 million? Brent muttered, running a shaky hand through his hair. I do not have $12 million in liquid cash for a severance payment. Then you better find it, I said, leaning back in my chair. Sell the yacht. Sell the summer house in the Hamptons. Or explain to the board why you need to dip into the emergency reserves because you did not rid my personnel file. This destroys me, Brent said. But if you do not pay it, I said, my voice cold and hard, I send the email to Eurotech confirming the contract is void. Then you lose the $200 million deal. Then the Securities and Exchange Commission comes knocking. Then you do not just lose your job, Brent. You lose the company. You go to prison. I checked my watch. I have a yoga class at 11 o'clock. I need an answer before I leave. Brent Harris had accepted the financial cost, but the war was not over. The true war was not in the shouting match. It was in the drafting of the settlement. Pay her, Brent? Marcus Chen urged, slumped in his chair. It is the only way to seal the 14B breach. We can structure the settlement to include a waiver where she retroactively validates the signatures. We pay her to fix your mess. I hate you, Brent hissed at me, his eyes burning with pure, unadulterated loathing. I know, I smiled gently. That is why I added a premium. A premium, yes, I confirmed. The 1.5% is the contractual obligation. That is for my property, the royalty I am owed. For me to come in and sign the wet ink validation on the 2018 documents to save your $200 million Eurotech deal. That requires a consulting fee. How much? Another $2 million, I said. Call it the Brent tax. It is compensation for the sudden, unanticipated stress of being terminated without cause by an illiterate turnip. The next hour was a blur of aggressive typing and hushed phone calls. Brent had stormed out to call the chief financial officer, leaving me alone with the mercenary lawyers, Sterling and his partner. This was where the real intellectual battle took place. Sterling slid a laptop toward me. We have drafted a preliminary settlement and release agreement. he said, his voice flat. It structures the $14.6 million as a lump sum payment. In exchange, you release all claims, sign the retroactive validity documents for the 2008 and 2018 agreements, and agree to a standard non-disclosure agreement and non-compete. I pulled the laptop closer. I did not just read it, I dissected it. Section 4. I said, pointing at the screen. Employee agrees to a global non-compete for a period of 5 years in the data licensing sector. Standard. Sterling said. We are paying you a fortune. We cannot have you going to a competitor next week. Delete it, I said. Excuse me. Delete it? I repeated. I am not an employee anymore. I am a consultant, and you are not paying me for my silence. You are paying me for my property, my royalties. I am not signing a non-compete. If I want to go work for Eurotech next week, I will. You do not get to purchase my livelihood. Sterling frowned and hesitated. Brent will not like that. Brent is not here, I replied, and Brent does not have a choice. If I do not sign the Eurotech deal dies today. Do you want to be the one to tell him the deal fell through because you got greedy on a non-compete clause? Sterling looked sick. He deleted the clause. Section 7. I continued, scanning the document. Non-disparagement. Employee agrees never to speak negatively about Streamline, its officers, or its operations. That stays, Sterling said firmly. We cannot have you trashing the chief executive on social media. I will agree to non-disparagement regarding the company's intellectual property and its financials. I conceded, but I retain the right to speak factually about my tenure and the circumstances of my departure. If someone asks why I left, I am not going to lie. Wiccan language that. Marcus interjected, trying desperately to play peacemaker. Mutual non-disparagement. We will not badmouth you either. Fine, I said. But I want a clause added. Section 8, Sterling said, his voice wary. What is it? The DeVito clause, I said, keeping my face absolutely straight. The what? I want a formal written apology from Brent Harris, I specified. Signed in wet ink, acknowledging that my termination was an error in judgment and thanking me for my 16 years of service. And I want it framed, Marcus gasped softly. He will never do that. It is humiliating. It is necessary, I said. It is for my file. I was not doing it for the file. I was doing it because I wanted to hang it in my bathroom. They argued. They called Brent again. I heard shouting from the hallway. Eventually, Brent came back in, looking like he had aged 10 years in one morning. Fine, he snapped. You get your money, you get your apology. Just sign the damn retroactive amendment so I can wire the funds to Germany. Money first, I said. Wire transfer? Fedwire. I want to see the confirmation number before my pen touches the paper. You cannot wire $14 million in an hour! Brent yelled. You are a bankable tech company, I said calmly. Call your representative at the bank. You can do it in 10 minutes if you want to. Or you can risk the $200 million deal. The choice is yours. Brent glared at the chief financial officer who had just walked in. Do it, he barked. We sat in silence for 12 minutes. I stared at the chaotic abstract art on the wall. My phone buzzed. A notification from my banking application flashed on the screen. Deposit received. $14.6 million. I checked the balance. It was real. The adrenaline was hitting its peak. I picked up the pen, a cheap plastic pen I had pulled from my purse. I pulled the 2018 amendment, the fresh copy they had just printed, toward me. I signed my name, Lauren Vance, Chief Licensing Architect. Then I signed the settlement agreement. Doan, I said, capping the pen. I stood up. I closed my leather briefcase. I left the 3 folders empty on the table. The bomb had been defused, but the gold was in my pocket. Pleasure doing business with you. Brent, I said. He did not look up. He was staring at the table, his mind already calculating how he was going to explain the massive dip in cash reserves to the board next quarter. He had survived, but he was crippled. I walked out. I had won. I walked out of the war room a free woman. The bomb had been defused, the company was temporarily saved, but the gold was securely in my pocket. I walked down the long, polished corridor, the only sound the quiet click of my heels, a stark contrast to the silence of the rest of the floor. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a strange, heavy exhaustion. It was the crash after the high, but the number in my bank account, $14.6 million, was a hell of a cushion to land on. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked past the reception desk. Sarah was still there, but she looked terrified to make eye contact. "It is okay, Sarah," I said, offering a genuine, kind smile. "I am leaving for good this time." "Did it go okay?" she whispered, her eyes wide with worry. "It went fine," I said. I paused, remembering my small, windowless office. "Hey, Sarah, you know that plant in my old office? The peace lily?" "Yes." "Do not water it," I said. "Let it die. It hates this place anyway." I walked out the front doors. The air outside smelled sweet. It smelled like freedom. It smelled like early retirement. I got into my sensible Volvo and tossed the briefcase onto the passenger seat. I did not drive home immediately. I drove instead to a small, dark dive bar about 3 miles away. The Rusty Nut was where Old Man Harris used to take us after we signed a big deal in the early days. It was a dumps. Peanut shells on the floor, neon signs that buzzed. It was 11:30 in the morning. The place was empty except for the bartender, a guy named Al who looked like he had been carved out of granite. "Lauren," Al said, blinking slowly. "Have not seen you in years. Shouldn't you be at the glass tower?" "Not anymore, Al," I said, climbing onto a worn stool. "I am retired." "Retired? You look too young to retire." "I got a severance package," I said. "A generous one." "Well, congrats." "What are you drinking?" "Champagne," I said. "The cheap stuff. Cold." He popped a mini bottle of domestic sparkling wine and poured it into a flute. I sat there, sipping the bubbles, and looked at my phone. I deleted my work email account from the app. I deleted the Slack app. I deleted the calendar. My phone felt physically lighter. I thought about Brent. He was probably spinning a narrative right now. He would tell the board it was a strategic legal settlement to fortify intellectual property positions. He would use buzzwords. He would survive, probably. Men like Brent usually fall upward, but he would never sleep soundly again. Every time he signed a contract, every time he saw a legal brief, he would flinch. He would wonder if there was another trap door, another clause, another Lauren waiting in the weeds. And the best part, there was. I had not told him about the server migration protocols. In about 6 months, the system was scheduled to do an automated purge of redundant data logs. I had written the script years ago, and unless someone manually overrode it, the metadata for the entire 2019 to 2023 archive was going to vanish. I could have told him. I could have sold him the password for another $1 million. But some things you do for money, and some things you do just for the chaos. I took a sip of champagne. To Brent. I toasted to the empty bar. May your pivots always be painful. I finished the drink. I left a $100 bill on the counter. Keep the change, Al. I walked out into the sunlight. I had a yoga class to get to. And after that, well, I heard the Amalfi Coast is beautiful this time of year. And I finally had the time and the wet ink to go see it. My dignity had not just returned. It had been capitalized, vested, and paid out in full.